Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. If you're joining us today, we have an incredibly detailed and expansive analysis lined up specifically for you.
You really do.
But right before we get started, please take a second to just like and subscribe. It really helps us out, and it ensures you never miss the deep dives we're constantly putting together.
Right, makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So today, we are reviewing a highly provocative, explosive new ebook. If you find the ideas we're unpacking today compelling, I highly urge you to check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book, and to follow the author at Conrad Riker at Substack.
It's definitely an exhaustively researched text. I mean, it really demands a thorough examination. The source material we're diving into today is titled Men's Rights: Two-Tier Injustice, Men the Designated Losers Who Pay for Everything by Conrad Riker.
Exactly. And to give you a clear, objective overview of the mission today, Riker's core thesis is that modern institutions have been entirely captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies. According to the author, these forces have fundamentally rewritten history and currently operate to subjugate men. The book claims that society treats men as disposable providers, extracting their labor and resources while systematically denying them dignity and basic rights.
Yeah, that's the core of his argument.
Now, right at the top, we really need to offer our crucial impartiality disclaimer. This source material contains highly politically charged content.
Highly charged.
Very. And as always on this deep dive, we remain strictly neutral. We are neither endorsing nor taking sides on the viewpoints presented. Our job today is to impartially unpack the author's arguments, meticulously explore the data he presents, and help you understand the deeply held perspectives of the men's rights and red-pilled manosphere movements that this book is explicitly written for.
Right.
Because you follow this space closely, you're likely familiar with the foundational concepts. But our goal here is to really understand the history of our institutions exactly as the author sees them, specifically how they functioned before they were supposedly captured by these modern ideologies.
Precisely. We're essentially acting as your analytical guides through Riker's landscape today. The book is structured as a wake-up call, arguing that men physically built the world but are now being socially engineered to apologize for it.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at the historical, the legal, educational, and cultural evidence he uses to build that comprehensive case, and we really want to drill down into the underlying philosophy of his arguments.
Okay, let's unpack this. The author makes a very bold claim right out of the gate regarding how we look at the past. He argues that the history of human civilization, at least as it's currently curated and taught by modern institutions, is actively erasing male achievements.
He does.
Or, if it can't erase them, it reframes them entirely as acts of oppression.
Yeah, and he points to very specific, very modern choices to illustrate this cultural shift. Riker argues that the foundational narrative of how civilization was literally constructed has been inverted.
Turned upside down.
Exactly. So instead of being taught as a story of male sacrifice, physical endurance, innovation, protection, the curriculum now frames history as just a story of patriarchal violence and colonial exploitation.
And to ground this, he brings up a really striking contrast from 2023. This blew my mind a little. He mentions that Google honored a woman who invented a new shade of lipstick with a Google doodle on their homepage.
Right, a massive global celebration of a cosmetic invention.
Yeah, but during that exact same week, the 120th anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight happened, and it passed without a single pixel of recognition from the platform.
Nothing.
To Riker, you don't just forget the invention of human flight. He views this as a deliberate editorial choice about what we, as a captured culture, choose to celebrate.
And if we look at how he applies this to broader historical eras, Riker examines the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, right. This is a huge section.
Yeah. For generations, this era was taught as a monumental milestone of human innovation. Men went into incredibly dangerous, dirty factories and freezing workshops to build the machines that automated labor. Riker points out the raw data here. This era lifted billions of people out of crushing agricultural poverty, drastically increased global lifespans, and paved the way for modern literacy rates. But today, Riker argues that modern educational institutions teach this era almost exclusively through the lens of exploitative labor practices.
Right. When Riker looks at that framing, he asks a really crucial question. Where is the acknowledgement of the men who actually did the dying to create that progress?
Yeah.
He notes that the narrative completely glosses over the fact that it was men doing the life-threatening, bodily destroying work to build the modern world.
He also points to UNESCO's 2021 Heritage of Equality campaign for this.
Oh, yeah. Talk about that.
According to the book, this campaign actively removed male-only engineering feats from various global education modules.
Like which ones?
We're talking about the Roman aqueducts, the Egyptian pyramids, the Panama Canal. Because these massive leaps in human infrastructure were built exclusively by men, Riker argues they no longer fit the modern, quote-unquote, inclusive narrative, and therefore they are just quietly erased from the curriculum. He extends this to individual innovators as well. He mentions how figures like Thomas Edison, who quite literally brought electric light to the world, are now deemed too patriarchal to acknowledge in certain progressive educational settings.
Meanwhile, he says media giants like Disney are actively pushing narratives that frame traditional male history as inherently problematic. But what's really crucial to understand here is Riker's counter-argument. He doesn't just complain about the erasure.
Right, he goes deeper.
Yeah, he contrasts it with the stark biological reality of human history. He makes a strictly biological argument: the average man has 40% more upper body strength than the average woman.
And he insists that this biological reality is the core engine of civilization, right? It isn't a social construct, it is a physiological fact.
Exactly. Riker insists that this specific biological reality is the very reason men took on the dangerous, back-breaking physical work required to build civilization from the dirt up.
While women nurtured the next generation, men protected the perimeter and provided the raw resources.
Right. And Riker's argument is that this historical division of labor wasn't oppression, as modern gender studies departments might claim, but rather optimization.
Optimization, yes. It was an evolutionary strategy for species survival in a brutally unforgiving natural world.
I want you to really consider the psychological angle the author is pushing here. Think about how changing the narrative of history impacts young boys today. If a young boy is looking for role models, and he's constantly taught by his teachers and his media, the men of the past were nothing more than brutal oppressors.
How does that shape his psyche?
Exactly. Riker makes the poignant argument that boys are now being explicitly taught to apologize for the past, rather than be inspired by it.
He asks, when was the last time a child organically said, I want to be an inventor like Edison, instead of being prompted to say, I want to be an activist?
Right. Riker theorizes that the modern curriculum is carefully designed to disarm boys, to make them doubt their natural instincts, and to disconnect them from their own legacy of building and protecting.
That historical disconnection leads us directly into Riker's profound rejection of a concept that is absolutely foundational to modern progressive thought. The book vehemently rejects the concept of male privilege.
Yeah, he goes hard on this.
Very hard. Now, this term was popularized by Peggy McIntosh in the 1980s, but Riker doesn't view it as a legitimate sociological observation. He calls it nothing more than repackaged Marxism with a gender twist.
In his view, society actually ruthlessly exploits male sacrifice, while merely dressing it up as honor or duty just to keep the men working. The data points he uses to dismantle the privilege narrative are sobering.
They really are.
He pulls directly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics 2023 report, showing that men make up 93% of workplace fatality.
That is a staggering number.
93%. We are talking about deep-sea fishermen, coal miners, firefighters, frontline soldiers, high-rise construction workers, loggers. These are not what anyone operating in reality would call privileged positions. They are dirty, physically demanding, and highly lethal.
And he contrasts those roles with the positions predominantly held by women in the modern economy. Education, human resources, administration, healthcare. Statistically, these are much safer, indoor, stable jobs.
Yeah.
So Riker poses a philosophical question to the reader. How can a man who sleeps on a freezing oil rig for 3 weeks straight to provide for his family be called a beneficiary of a toxic, privileged system, while a woman working in a climate-controlled corporate office with mandated maternity leave is labeled oppressed?
He really hammers the concept of bodily autonomy, too. He points out that 97% of combat deaths in modern wars, looking at conflicts in Afghanistan, Iraq, and currently Ukraine, are men.
97%.
And in the United States, only men are forced, under threat of severe federal penalty and felony charges, to register for selective service. Women have the option to serve, but men are legally forced into the meat grinder if the state demands it.
He calls that the ultimate proof of institutionalized male disposability. And to illustrate how this sacrifice is culturally processed, he contrasts how society treats different types of modern public figures. He brings up the late Chadwick Boseman, the actor who famously played Black Panther.
This is a really profound comparison in the book. Boseman works silently through terminal colon cancer. He was filming grueling action sequences, visiting sick children in hospitals, all while his own body was failing him.
Right.
He never complained. He never made his illness a brand. He just did his duty to his craft and his audience, and he died at 43. Riker notes that Bozeman received polite, respectful mourning, but society quickly moved on.
Right, and then Riker compares that stoic male sacrifice to the cultural treatment of Greta Thunberg. According to Riker, Thunberg is treated like a messiah. He points out that she tours the world in luxury jets or sponsored racing yachts, aggressively lecturing working-class people about their carbon footprint. Riker uses this juxtaposition to argue that society no longer rewards or reveres men for silent duty and endurance. Instead, it canonizes individuals who scream about oppression while doing minimal actual physical labor.
He applies this same lens of selective erasure to Hollywood. He notes that major studios churn out an endless stream of fictional CGI female empowerment movies. He lists franchises like Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel.
But he points out that no modern studio will greenlight the true story of the 112 real men who died building the Hoover Dam.
He says there is real male blood in the concrete of the infrastructure we take for granted, but Hollywood ignores it to focus on fictional female triumphs. Riker actually coins a specific phrase for this systemic hypocrisy: emotional terrorism.
Yes, emotional terrorism is a heavy conceptual anchor in the book. It's the idea that society fully expects men to jump into freezing rivers, to save strangers, to confront armed home invaders, or to die maintaining the high-voltage electrical grids of civilization, but then turns around and tells those exact same men that their gender is inherently toxic and oppressive.
It's a psychological double bind.
Exactly.
If men are feeling this marginalized and psychologically manipulated in adulthood, it really begs the question, where does this conditioning start? Riker traces this straight back to early childhood classrooms.
It starts early.
Very early. His core argument here is that the education system is failing boys on purpose. He claims the system inherently pathologizes normal, biological male behavior and exclusively rewards femininity.
This is what sociologists often refer to as the boy crisis, but Riker argues it isn't an accident, it is an ideological design. He provides stark examples of how this ideology is shaping the very architecture of classrooms. He points to Sweden as patient zero for this.
Patient zero, yeah.
In Sweden, several state-funded preschools actually banned the words boy and girl. They stripped the environment of traditional male toys, replacing toy trucks and guns with gender-neutral space ones.
And what was the statistical fallout of trying to engineer away biological reality?
According to the OECD PIASA 2022 data that Riker cites, by age 9, boys operating in these gender-neutral systems were 15% behind girls in reading comprehension and basic literacy.
Wow, 15%.
The Riker argues that instead of working with the natural biological inclinations of young boys, these educational systems are actively trying to legislate male biology away, and boys are paying the price with their intellectual development.
And he makes it clear that this isn't just an isolated experiment in Sweden. He looks deeply at the United States and the implementation of the Common Core state standards.
Right.
Riker argues that these specific educational standards heavily favor verbal expression, sitting still for long periods, and group consensus. Biologically and developmentally, these are skills where girls tend to mature faster and dominate.
Meanwhile, boys, who generally prefer direct answers, physical movement, healthy competition, and spatial reasoning, are completely left behind.
And when those boys inevitably act out, because their natural learning styles are suppressed, Riker notes they are heavily medicated. He argues that the massive spike in ADHD diagnoses is largely just the medicalization of normal boyish energy.
To prove that boys need a different environment, he cites a fascinating case study of a Texas elementary school. This school decided to buck the trend and reintroduce physical competition. They added multiple unstructured recesses throughout the day, organized tug-of-war tournaments, and allowed aggressive, active play.
And the results.
The results were immediate and astounding. The boys' standardized test scores went up by 23%, and disciplinary issues across the school dropped by 35%.
It's an incredible data point.
Yeah.
But what Riker focuses on is the administrative reaction to that success.
Yes.
Despite those objectively incredible results that help boys succeed, Riker notes that gender equity activists immediately mobilized to block the expansion of this program to other districts.
They labeled the concept of boys playing tug-of-war as regressive and fostering toxic masculinity.
Which naturally leads us to ask, if a program works objectively to help struggling boys succeed in school, why would anyone shut it down?
Riker's conclusion is grim. He argues that the future of education is deliberately, in his words, emasculating. He asserts that modern feminist administrators claim to want equality, but they only advocate for policies that specifically benefit girls.
When a solution is proven to specifically help boys, it is immediately labeled as discrimination or a return to the patriarchy.
He connects this educational crisis directly to the severe lack of male teachers in early childhood education and the systemic banning of active aggressive play.
He really laments the loss of physical discipline programs. He notes that traditional martial arts programs or physical education classes aimed at boys have declined 42% since 2010.
42%, and what replaced them?
According to the book, it's emotional literacy circles, where active boys are forced to sit in rings, hold talking sticks, and discuss feeling sad. Riker makes a very stark point here. He says there's nothing inherently wrong with experiencing feelings, but feelings will not stop a home invader.
Discipline, physical competence, and courage do.
By erasing the roles and the training that make boys feel capable and needed as protectors, Riker argues we are raising a generation that is disengaged, chronically depressed, and ultimately dropping out of society altogether.
And that marginalization in the classroom seamlessly translates into disenfranchisement in adulthood, particularly when men are forced to interact with the state. This brings us to Riker's analysis of the legal double standard and what he terms the war on fatherhood.
Right.
Riker asserts that family courts and the broader legal system now operate on a fundamental, baked-in presumption of male guilt. He argues that the state treats fathers not as essential parents, but merely as financial ATMs to be drained.
When you look at the evidence he brings up regarding domestic violence policy, it is particularly shocking. He dives deep into the Duluth model of domestic violence intervention. For context, this is a framework widely used by law enforcement and courts across the United States.
It's everywhere.
Yeah. According to Riker, the underlying premise of the Duluth model is that it treats all incidents of domestic violence as a patriarchal tool of control. It operates on the ideological assumption that men are always the inherent perpetrators using violence to maintain systemic dominance, and women are always the victims reacting to that dominance.
Because of this baked-in ideology, the practical application of the law becomes heavily skewed. Riker points out that when law enforcement arrives at a domestic dispute and both parties file complaints of physical violence, men are 3 times more likely to be the ones arrested and removed from the home, regardless of who initiated the conflict.
The framework simply does not accommodate the idea of mutual combat or female-initiated violence on an equal footing.
Furthermore, he points to a massive funding disparity that reflects this bias. Riker cites data from the National Crime Victimization Survey, which shows that men actually make up roughly 38 to 40% of all domestic violence victims.
38 to 40%.
Yet, despite making up nearly half the victims, men's shelters and male-focused domestic violence resources receive only 0.1% of state and federal domestic violence funding.
0.1%. That is wild. He highlights a specific tragic case in Toronto from 2021 to illustrate the real-world impact of this. The city of Toronto shut down its only dedicated male homeless and abuse shelter. The rationale given by the city council was that women and children must come first in resource allocation.
This was despite the fact that men made up roughly 70% of the total homeless population in the city at the time.
Riker doesn't mince words here. He calls this institutionalized misandry, where male suffering is simply invisible to the state.
He also goes incredibly hard after the university system, specifically focusing on Title IX tribunals. He points out that under recent administrative guidelines, campus tribunals use a preponderance of the evidence standard.
Right, the 51% rule.
Exactly. This means that an accused male student can be expelled and have his life ruined based on just 51% certainty from a panel of campus administrators. Worse, Riker notes these tribunals often deny the accused the right to cross-examine their accuser or even see the full evidence against them.
And the statistical result of this lowered standard of proof: a 90% conviction rate for accused males on college campuses.
Riker draws a very dark historical parallel here, likening these Title IX proceedings to Stalin's show trials, where the verdict is predetermined by the ideology of the judges rather than the objective facts of the case.
And in the realm of family court, he highlights stories that are meant to enrage the reader. He details the case of Robert Kim, a software engineer living in Georgia. According to the book, Kim out-earned his ex-wife, had a completely clean criminal record, no history of substance abuse, and desired 50-50 custody.
Yet he was granted only 4 weekends a year with his daughter.
4 weekends. Why? simply because the family court judge arbitrarily deemed the mother's home more stable and ordered Kim to pay massive child support to maintain her lifestyle.
Riker uses cases like Kim's to speculate on the broader cultural and legal impact of the Believe All Women movement. He argues that this social mantra has effectively destroyed the foundational Western legal concept of due process. When society defaults to believing one gender implicitly, the other gender loses their civil rights.
The book argues that modern feminism doesn't just want access to the system, which was the goal of early waves. It now wants absolute dominance over it. Riker claims the legal system has been weaponized into a tool used to strip men of their assets, their freedom, and their children, all based on a shifting legal standard where, as he explicitly puts it, when she speaks, he loses.
How is this glaring legal reality justified and maintained culturally? Riker posits that the media, entertainment, and psychological institutions have formed a coalition to create the ultimate double bind for men. They systematically label traditional male traits as toxic during times of peace, while secretly demanding those very same traits whenever there is a societal crisis.
He points right to the top of the psychological establishment, the American Psychological Association. In 2018, the APA released official guidelines explicitly stating that traditional masculinity, characterized by stoicism, competitiveness, dominance, and aggression, is, on the whole, psychologically harmful.
Riker asks you, the listener, to really internalize what that means. The very psychological qualities that built civilizations, explored continents, and kept societies safe from invasion are now classified by the medical establishment as a hazard.
He contrasts this institutional pathologizing with massive media double standards, particularly in true crime and news reporting. He looks at how perpetrators are framed based on their gender.
He brings up the case of Dr. Lauren Dickinson.
Right, who tragically murdered her 3 young children in New Zealand. Riker notes that the international media overwhelmingly framed her as a tragic victim of intense mental illness, systemic pressure, and severe postpartum depression. The narrative was entirely focused on how society failed her.
But then Riker pivots to Chris Watts, who annihilated his family. When Watts committed his horrific crimes, he was immediately labeled a sociopath, a monster, and held up by numerous media outlets as the ultimate terrifying symbol of toxic masculinity.
Riker points out the discrepancy. For Watts, there was absolutely no media discussion of workplace stress, financial pressure, or male emotional isolation. He was just pure inherent evil. Riker argues the media standard is totally different. Female violence is a cry for help. Male violence is an indictment of their entire gender.
He also looks at the hashtag #MeToo movement and the destruction of careers without due process. He brings up the veteran broadcaster Charlie Rose, who was fired from CBS and had his legacy erased with no trial, no formal legal charges, just allegations and a trending hashtag.
Meanwhile, Riker points out that prominent women like Megyn Kelly and Hillary Clinton keep their massive platforms, lucrative book deals, and cultural influence despite highly controversial actions, foreign policy disasters, or racially charged comments of their own.
And to show just how pervasive this underlying hostility toward men is in the cultural zeitgeist, Riker notes a fascinating piece of data. He looks at Google's Enneagram viewer, which tracks the frequency of word usage in millions of published books.
According to Riker, the Enneagram data shows a staggering 400% rise in the specific phrase "men are trash" in published literature since 2010.
400%. Riker argues this proves that misimagery isn't just an edgy online joke. It is a widespread, culturally sanctioned, and financially rewarded belief system. And he says this cultural conditioning is perhaps most visible and insidious in everyday entertainment. He specifically targets the Writers Guild of America and their reliance on the ubiquitous sitcom dad trope.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Think about almost every commercial, television show, or sitcom you've seen in the last 2 decades. The father figure is almost invariably the punchline.
Always.
He is portrayed as a bumbling, incompetent, emotionally stunted idiot who is constantly tripping over his own shoelaces or messing up basic household tasks. Meanwhile, the mother is portrayed as the hyper-competent, smart, put-together manager of the family who is constantly rolling her eyes at her overgrown child of a husband.
Riker traces the history of this. In the 1950s and 60s, television portrayed capable, morally grounded patriarchs. But starting in the late 80s and accelerating through the 90s and 2000s, the competent father was erased.
Riker says this isn't lazy writing, it's a deliberate cultural shift. It is designed to normalize the idea that men cannot be trusted with domestic responsibility or moral leadership. By constantly broadcasting this image, the media weakens the role of fathers in the cultural consciousness.
He argues that when you spend decades pumping media into homes, telling men they are fools, you don't create equality between the sexes, you create emasculation. And when men are emasculated and told they're unnecessary to the functioning of the home, they disengage entirely.
Which perfectly explains how this cultural devaluation affects interpersonal relationships and the modern dating market. Riker views the current dating landscape not as a romantic endeavor, but as a rigidly algorithmic economy driven entirely by female hypergamy.
Now, since you follow the manosphere space, you know that hypergamy is the biological evolutionary drive for women to seek mates of higher status. Men who are taller, richer, stronger, and more socially dominant than they are.
Riker's argument isn't just that hypergamy exists, it's that modern technology, specifically dating apps, has supercharged this biological instinct, leaving average, hardworking men completely locked out of the dating market.
He brings the receipts to prove this. He cites Pew Research from 2022, finding that 62% of women under the age of 30 have used dating apps, yet men are forced to send 92% of the first messages.
92%. Women are essentially swiping passively, sitting back and filtering through a massive inventory of options, while men are desperately hustling just to be seen by the algorithm. Internal data from the dating app, Hinge even reported that women receive 3.7 times more matches than men on average.
Riker expands this economic analysis of modern intimacy to platforms like OnlyFans. He notes that the top 1% of creators on the platform, who are overwhelmingly young women, make millions of dollars simply by commodifying their sexuality and parasocial availability.
Meanwhile, the typical male creator trying to make money on the platform makes under $100 a month.
But what Riker really zeroes in on here is the profound moral double standard. Young women are culturally empowered, celebrated by mainstream magazines, and told to own their sexuality for massive tax-free profit.
Meanwhile, the lonely men who are paying for this content, who are literally funding this entire economy, are publicly shamed as creeps, losers, or told they need intensive therapy. Riker argues the digital algorithm dictates a cruel reality. Women get paid handsomely simply for being desirable, while men only get paid for being useful or providing resources.
To put a human face on this algorithmic cruelty, he tells the heart-wrenching story of a guy named Jesse. Jesse is a 28-year-old guy from Austin, Texas. He realized he was struggling in the dating market, so he decided to play by the rules society gave him.
He spent $12,000 on self-improvement over 2 years. He bought an expensive gym membership, hired a trainer, bought custom-tailored shirts, underwent testosterone optimization therapy, and even hired what is called a masculine embodiment coach to help his confidence.
And after all that monumental effort and financial investment to improve his status and become the man society says women want, Jesse's match response rate on Hinge remained below 6%.
94% of the women he matched with never even bothered to reply to his opening message.
Riker uses Jesse to illustrate a macro point. Jesse wasn't defective, and he didn't do anything wrong. He was simply deemed surplus by a hypergamous algorithm where women are only competing for the top 5% of men.
And he emphasizes that this isn't just a Western American phenomenon. Riker points to China's Shirnu, or the leftover women panic. These are highly educated urban Chinese women in their late 20s and 30s who absolutely refuse to date rural men or men who earn even slightly less than they do.
Their hypergamous expectations have completely outpaced the actual supply of top-tier wealthy men, resulting in an entire class of millions of rural working-class men who are deemed permanently unmarriageable.
Which brings us to how Riker attempts to completely reframe a highly controversial topic, the incel phenomenon, or involuntary celibates. Mainstream society and media almost exclusively paint this group as dangerous, radicalized extremists waiting to commit violence.
But Riker synthesizes a vastly different view. He frames them not as terrorists, but as the canaries in the coal mine of a dying culture.
Exactly. Riker argues that these are simply rational men who have looked at the data, recognize that the mathematical odds of the dating market are completely stacked against them, and have logically decided to just give up. He even notes that the Southern Poverty Law Center quietly removed incels from their official hate group list in 2022 due to a complete lack of organized ideology or centralized threat.
Riker issues a profound warning here. When millions of men realize that the societal system was never built for them to win, they walk away. And when a critical mass of men give up on building families and protecting communities, society faces imminent collapse.
He argues that a world without strong, motivated men isn't a peaceful, progressive utopia. It's a world without technological innovation, without heavy construction, and without protection from external threats.
So, if men are giving up on dating and family formation, what about the historical pillars of society? This leads us to Riker's analysis of institutional capture.
The book claims that even historically hyper-male-centric institutions, religion, the military, the corporate boardroom, have completely surrendered to what Riker defines as cultural Marxism.
And to be clear on his operational definition, Riker isn't talking about Marxist economics here. He's talking about the Marxist tactic of dividing society into oppressors and oppressed, and applying that framework to gender to systematically push men out of positions of authority.
Let's look at how he breaks this capture down sector by sector, starting with religion. Riker notes that traditionally, Western religion provided men with a sacred order, a clear duty to their families, and undeniable spiritual authority.
But now he points to modern, progressive, feminist theologians who are claiming, without any historical or biblical evidence, that figures like Mary Magdalene actually led early Christianity, attempting to rewrite theology to diminish male apostles.
He looks at the institutional data of the Episcopal Church, noting that it is now comprised of 55% female clergy. He directly correlates that feminization of leadership with the fact that male attendance in the church has dropped by a staggering 42% since 1974. Men simply do not want to attend a church where they are treated as an afterthought or a problem.
He even cites a radical example of a Unitarian church in Portland that literally removed the Ten Commandments from their sanctuary, replacing them with the 10 principles of inclusive living.
They swapped foundational moral laws like "thou shalt not steal" for therapeutic phrases like "honor all property boundaries." Riker views this shift as institutions handing men emotional coloring books and calling it discipleship. He argues men crave moral rigor, not therapeutic affirmation.
Yeah, then he pivots to the military and first responders. These are the institutions built on physical courage. These are the guys running into burning buildings and taking enemy fire. But Riker points out that since 2016, firefighting applications from men nationwide have dropped by 28%.
Why is the recruitment pool drying up? Riker says it's because no one in authority tells young men their strength and aggression are needed to save lives anymore. Instead, they are forced to sit through seminars telling them their masculine presence is problematic.
He looks at policing as well. In 2023, the NYPD hired 300 new diversity, equity, and inclusion officers for administrative roles, while simultaneously cutting 500 actual street patrol positions due to budget constraints.
Riker asks, does a diversity officer stop a mugging? In the public school system, the federal government allocated $2.3 billion to anti-bullying programs, heavily focused on emotional expression and sensitivity training, while simultaneously cutting JROTC programs that actually teach young men discipline, marksmanship, and leadership in over 150 schools.
And the corporate world hasn't escaped this either. Riker examines the devastating economic impact of corporate DEI mandates. He cites Eurostat 2023 data showing that in European tech and engineering firms forced to comply with strict gender quotas for their boards and executive teams, research and development spending dropped by 12%, and new patent filings fell by 14%.
He brings up Norway as the ultimate cautionary tale. Norway passed a strict gender quota law in 2003, requiring 40% female board representation. Did it usher in an era of merit-based diversity? No. According to Riker, it just created the golden skirt phenomenon.
This is where a tiny elite cartel of the exact same highly connected women ended up holding up to 25 different corporate board seats each, simply so companies could legally comply with the quota. It didn't help average women, it just punished competent men.
He also mentions the financial fallout at Deutsche Bank. In 2020, the bank removed 3 highly successful veteran male executives who had 25 years of experience managing complex trading desks, specifically to make room for external diversity hires who had never managed a desk of that size.
Within 6 months of this leadership change, the bank's stock dropped 11%. Riker's underlying connection across all these institutions is stark and terrifying. When a civilization prioritizes identity over competence, technological innovations suffer, structural integrity fails, and the very infrastructure of society is put at severe risk.
This exhaustive diagnosis of societal capture naturally leads to the most anticipated part of the book, Riker's actual prescription for men today. If the educational system, the legal courts, the dating market, and corporate America are all rigged against men, as Riker so meticulously argues, what is a modern man supposed to do?
His solution is radical. He tells men to stop begging for inclusion in a system that is fundamentally designed to exploit them. Instead, men must opt out entirely, build parallel institutions, and focus purely on self-mastery.
He introduces a fascinating new archetype here, the red pill monk. These are men who consciously choose intentional celibacy and complete financial and geographical autonomy. They do this specifically to avoid what Riker calls the love jihad, his controversial term for a legal and social system that extracts male resources via marriage, inevitable divorce, and punitive alimony.
To ground this philosophy in reality, he shares the story of Derek from Denver. Derek is an ex-Marine in his 30s who saw the writing on the wall. He moved into a 40-foot off-grid tiny home in the mountains of Montana. He grows 80% of his own food, generates his own solar power, and works as a freelance coder using satellite internet, quietly making $8,000 a month.
Riker points out the brilliance of Derek's setup. Derek has zero debt, zero risk of losing half his assets to alimony, and is completely immune to corporate HR departments, DEI mandates, and family court judges. He has engineered a life of untouchable male freedom.
And Riker points to actual clinical data supporting this exact lifestyle choice. A 2023 Stanford University sociological study found that men who actively reject traditional relationship models, specifically those adhering to MGTOW, or men going their own way principles, had the absolute lowest antidepressant usage of any male demographic study.
Riker says this isn't a statistical anomaly. It's empirical proof that stepping off the rigged playing field and refusing to play a losing game drastically improves men's mental health.
When looking for a public champion of this unapologetic male future, Riker holds up Elon Musk as the ultimate archetype. Riker points out that while gender studies professors at Ivy League universities are busy debating microaggressions and pronouns, Musk's overwhelmingly male engineering teams are doing the actual high-risk, high-reward work that moves humanity forward.
They are building rockets that explode 14 times before finally succeeding and developing cutting-edge brain-computer interfaces. Riker absolutely praises Musk's embrace of extreme productivity.
He points out that Musk has 10 or more children, which Riker views as a vital act of defiance against what he considers the real crisis of our time: low global fertility and the demographic collapse of Western nations.
Furthermore, Riker applauds Musk for spending $44 billion to buy Twitter, now X. Riker argues Musk didn't do this for profit. He did it specifically to protect free speech from progressive feminist sensibilities, reinstating banned contrarian accounts because, as Riker powerfully writes, truth doesn't require permission.
So we have to ask the ultimate question. What does this all mean for the listener who is absorbing this ideology? For Riker, it means men must stop waiting for society to save them and instead forge their own legacy.
He advocates that men must actively support and fund male-exclusive brotherhoods that focus on mission, accountability, and physical strength groups, like the Iron Council or F3 Nation.
And politically, Riker demands a massive shift toward policies that make fatherhood profitable and prestigious again. He points to international examples, like countries such as Germany and France that use the tax code to heavily reward intact families.
Or Israel, which provides housing and societal prestige to pioneers who build large families. He brutally contrasts that with America, which he claims gives fathers absolutely nothing but legal risk, and is therefore getting societal collapse and an epidemic of fatherlessness in return.
He views the nuclear family as a necessary hierarchy, and insists that men must step up to lead it without apology. The entire book is a wildly provocative manifesto, ending with a blistering call to action for men to stand up rationally, reject the guilt thrust upon them, and build a better world entirely on their own terms.
It certainly is a comprehensive, interlocking worldview. Riker has taken data from economics, law, education, and biology, and synthesized it into a unified theory that challenges almost every single tenet of modern progressive institutional thought.
It is a perspective that forces you to critically reevaluate the narratives that are constantly fed to us by the mainstream culture.
And it leaves us with a final massive provocative thought to mull over, building right on the foundation of Riker's source material. Let's extrapolate this out. If, as Riker claims, civilization fundamentally and biologically relies on men taking on the high-risk, dangerous, unglamorous, and lethal roles to maintain our infrastructure, the high-voltage electrical grids, the deep-sea oil rigs, the combat zones, the sewage systems. What happens in just a single generation if this red pill survival tactic becomes the mainstream default?
Think about it.
If millions of capable, intelligent, strong men choose to become red pill monks and entirely opt out of mainstream society to live off-grid like Derek from Denver, who keeps the lights on?
Who runs into the burning buildings? Who maintains the servers?
It's a chilling logistical paradox. If the builders and protectors refuse to participate in a society they feel hates them, the infrastructure of that very society simply ceases to function.
It's the ultimate paradox of his survival guide, and it is a fascinating question of societal leverage.
It is an incredible concept to chew on. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to gently remind you once more that the views, statistics, interpretations, and arguments discussed today belong entirely to the author Conrad Riker. The deep dive remains a strictly neutral space for exploring diverse and even highly controversial source materials. Our only goal is to make you well informed about the complex ideas and movements shaping our world, regardless of where they fall on the political spectrum.
Understanding these perspectives, especially the ones that challenge the status quo so aggressively, is absolutely crucial for maintaining critical thinking in an era of constant information overload.
Absolutely. Now, before you go, please make sure to like and subscribe to the deep dive so you don't miss our future analyses. If you found this breakdown compelling and want to dive into the source material yourself to read these arguments firsthand, check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook Men's Rights: Two-Tier Injustice.
And you can follow the author's ongoing essays and cultural commentary by following at Conrad Riker on Substack.
Thank you so much for joining us and trusting us with your time on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.